6 Takeaways from the Times Investigation into Epstein's Death. That's the headline from the New York Times, and it's one of the most thorough examinations yet of a case that has fueled speculation and conspiracy theories for nearly 7 years. Jeffrey Epstein died in federal custody in August 2019 at the Metropolitan Correctional Center in New York. The city's medical examiner ruled it a suicide. But a large portion of the public never accepted that conclusion, and the belief that Epstein was murdered, silenced, perhaps, by powerful people with something to hide, has remained stubbornly widespread ever since. So what did the Times actually find? The investigation draws on tens of thousands of pages of newly released documents, interviews with dozens of people connected to the case, and perhaps most strikingly, handwritten notes that Epstein himself wrote while in jail, never before made public. And the picture that emerges is not one of a shadowy murder plot. It's something more tragic, and in some ways more disturbing. Let's start with the murder theory. The Times reporters examined it seriously. Their conclusion: for someone to have entered Epstein's cell and killed him, it would have required an elaborate conspiracy involving numerous people with detailed, precise knowledge of the jail's specific security systems, their particular malfunctions, and the facility's protocols. After scores of interviews and a review of all those documents, they found no evidence that any such plot existed. What they did find, and this is the part that hasn't been widely reported, is extensive evidence that Epstein had been signaling suicidal intent for weeks before he died. In his own handwritten notes found in jail, he wrote about pain, suffering, and not wanting the people he loved to suffer because of him. In conversations with lawyers and fellow inmates, he spoke openly about his inability to tolerate life in prison. More than one person around him grew genuinely worried about the risk he posed to himself. And it goes further than that. About 2.5 weeks before his death, Epstein apparently tried to hang himself in his cell. That attempt failed only because his cellmate at the time intervened. Jail officials never formally ruled it a suicide attempt, but Epstein left a note in his cell afterward, and investigators say that note's content and handwriting closely matched other writings they obtained from him. His cellmate also told the Times he caught Epstein preparing to kill himself by hanging on 2 separate occasions before that, and said he reported both incidents to corrections officers, reports that were not taken seriously. So here's where the story becomes less a mystery and more an institutional failure. By the time Epstein died, he had been placed in a special observation cell twice due to suicide risk. He had likely attempted suicide at least once, possibly 3 times. Both of his cellmates had raised alarms about him. Federal officers transporting him between jail and court had flagged him as a suicide risk. And yet, in direct violation of specific supervision orders that had been issued, he was left alone and unobserved in his final hours. The scene afterward only compounded the problem. The one guard who found Epstein's body immediately moved him in an attempt at resuscitation, which disturbed the scene. Paramedics and jail employees further disrupted it. Federal investigators later decided not to collect DNA evidence because the scene had been so compromised. There were actually multiple knotted fabric lengths in the cell, and the one taken into evidence turned out to be the wrong one, a detail that, when it emerged, made the physical evidence look far more suspicious than it actually was. The autopsy photographs, reviewed by the Times with multiple pathologists, present conflicting and confusing information. Almost none of the forensic experts consulted believed the manner of death, suicide or homicide, could be conclusively determined from the medical evidence alone. But several said the photos were still potentially consistent with at least one specific suicide scenario, given what's known about how the body was found and how the noose was attached. The bottom line from this investigation is uncomfortable in a different way than a murder theory. The most plausible explanation for Epstein's death is a catastrophic failure of supervision inside a federal jail, one that allowed a man who had repeatedly signaled he wanted to die to do exactly that, and then compounded the tragedy by handling the aftermath so poorly that certainty may never be fully within reach. If you or someone you know is struggling with thoughts of suicide, you can call or text 988 to reach the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline, available around the clock. This has been a look at the New York Times investigation into the death of Jeffrey Epstein, a story where the most damning conclusion isn't a conspiracy, but a system that failed at every turn.